And we kick off this evening with a look at the cinema.
I'm not a complicated man. I like cinema.
It's beautiful, beautiful cinema.
Cinema history come to life.
I found my solace in the small cinema I went to every Thursday night.
I'm a professor of cinema.
I go to the cinema for the stories.
There was no competition between the cinema and seminar.
I mean, it's not within the realm of conventional cinema.
And now,
here's Pace and Johnson
with a cinema review.
It is Monday, January 20th, 2025, 7 EST, and thank you for joining me for another episode of Cinemasters Reviews. Welcome back, everyone. It's great to great to be here. Really love always talking about movies with you guys. Took a month off for the holiday break. Got nice and rested. Really excited to talk about more movies, and really excited for the first episode of the year, talking about Leigh Whannell's Wolfman and the new comedy directed by Lawrence Lamont, One of Them Days. I say we jump right into the show, starting with our first review, Wolfman. This is the latest horror film from Leigh Whannell, the writer of the first Saw movies, as well as the director of movies such as Upgrade and 2020's remake of The Invisible Man with Elizabeth Moss. I think most people know the story of the Wolfman. There are a lot of different ways. We've seen different tellings of this story. This one focuses on a man by the name of Blake Lovell, and him and his family are starting to get stressed out with the style of like city life. So he decides to take him, his wife, and their daughter up to his home childhood remote cabin in Oregon. And on the way, they end up crashing their car. They end up getting into an altercation with a mysterious monster outside. And as you might guess from the movie, one of them starts turning into a Wolfman. I'm a big fan of Leigh Whannell's films. I really like that first Saw movie. I really love Upgrade. I think The Invisible Man, it came out right before theaters closed, but that was one of the best theatrical experiences like of that year, obviously, but just like in horror movies in general. Like I just think of that like dinner scene with Elizabeth Moss and her friend. I think the way how he perfectly updated the story of The Invisible Man to make it more modernized, I think that was really, really well done. So coming into this movie, I was really excited to see what Leigh Whannell was going to bring to the Wolfman story, and if he was going to be able to add his own personal style, his own personal edge to this. And disappointingly, I'm going to have to say I don't think he quite he makes this stand out from other adaptations of this story. Not to say it's bad per se. I just think when you have a director like Leigh Whannell, who has kind of made his name as an auteur, who has a vision, you want to see more than just your run-of-the-mill horror movie. And I think that is the biggest insult I can say about this movie, is it seems very, very modern horror. I'd say for the first like 10-15 minutes of this movie, we are focusing on young Blake with his dad living in their old house in Portland. We see the trauma that Blake's dad inflicted upon him, how he's still kind of living through that, how he's not trying to put that trauma on either his wife or his daughter. And just, we've seen so many horror movies recently, and just so many movies movies in general released in the past decade that deal with characters just dealing with their own trauma, how all the horror aspects are a metaphor for that, which can be done well, but unfortunately I just don't think this really had much to add to the table. And when you have a director like Leigh Whannell, it kind of is disappointing to see him walk into these really common tropes like that when it doesn't really have any new ideas to present to us. The beginning of the movie is very slow in a way that which is okay. Like I don't need my horror movies to be a scare a minute. I'm okay with it really like taking its time to really get into the main meat of the story to where our characters are really in danger. I think my major issue was, while Leigh Whannell is very good at creating atmosphere with his editing and with his like sound design, that is the one thing I will say about this movie. The sound design is excellent. When Blake first starts turning into the Wolfman, that's not a spoiler if you've seen the trailers. When Blake first starts turning into, and when it's really trying to show that his hearing is getting more sensitive and getting stronger, You have this one scene where the spider just starts crawling on the wall, and you hear every little sound the leg makes when it hits the wall, and that is really, really well done because it has this booming sound, this really small action. And I think that was really well done. But I just don't think the atmosphere did a great job at like really carrying that first half of the story when we're trying to get introduced to the characters, when we're trying to really get situated in this world and to give us a real reason to care about these characters. Like, we understand that Blake is kind of dealing with this trauma, how his wife, her name is Charlotte, is kind of trying to deal with this. She obviously loves her husband and she's trying to put on a good face for their family, but she can very clearly tell that it is affecting their family relationship. Christopher Abbott, the person who plays Blake, he is giving actually a really solid performance. He's an actor. I think he's pretty underrated. It's always really fun to see him show up. Julia Garner, who is an actress, I think is super underrated. I always love her, specifically in the stuff I've seen her on TV. Like, she was amazing in The Americans. She was excellent in Ozark. I honestly think she was honestly kind of boring in the role, and I think that's not necessarily her part. I think the part of the wife of the main character who's struggling through all these like really psychological and at points physical troubles, it was really just kind of underwritten. And like towards the end of the movie, you start feeling for her because obviously she's the one protecting her child from the Wolfman. But I just don't think Julia Garner really brought a ton because there wasn't really a ton of material for her to work from, which is really disappointing because I know she's a really great actress. I think one trope that this movie uses probably too much. I will give it credit. There are not a ton of jump scares. I think jump scares can be very effective, but when they are just used as the sole way of getting fear from the audience, and when you just have like dozens of jump scares in a 1 hour, 40-minute movie, it starts to get really tiring. I will give this movie credit. It uses its jump scares sparingly to not and it tries to be more creative with its scares. What I will say is this movie does use the trope of having characters just stare really longingly at like weird things that aren't even like it's not even these characters like staring at the Wolfman. They're just staring at something that is like a little bit off. Like when the family first gets to Portland, they get to the spot where like they can't pass because there's a fence blocking it, and they just see this silhouette of this guy just standing up, and they just sort of stare at it for maybe like 15-30 seconds, and it's trying to make it seem a little creepy, but I just think it used that trope way too much and it started getting annoying towards the end of the film, especially when we knew we were in danger. We didn't need that aspect from the characters. The effects for the Wolfman when Blake starts transforming, I think it was really cool. This is not what werewolves usually look like in most films, but I enjoy that Lee Winnell tried to create a little bit more grounded of a design, or at least as grounded as you can make, of a man turning into a half man, half wolf. The makeup effects are really, really well done. And if you're going to go see this movie, if you are a big fan of practical effects in your horror like I am, I do think the effects there were actually pretty uniquely done, and was a good blend of both makeup and CGI to me. The ending of the film, without spoiling, it ends with a big climactic showdown between certain characters. And I think you kind of know how it's going to end going into the film if you know the story of how almost every single werewolf story goes. So I had no issue with how the film got to the ending. I just think when we finally got there, it ends in a really anticlimactic way of just like, okay, our characters are just sort of here now. And I was just a little bit unsatisfied with what happens towards the end of the film. I do think, once again, from a directing standpoint, Lee Winnell is just naturally good at directing horror. I just don't think he added enough of himself to make this a worthwhile film to watch, and I ended up being really disappointed by the film. If I were to rank this movie on a scale of 0 to 10 videotapes, 0 being excellent, 0 being horrible, 10 being excellent. First show back, guys. I'm gonna give this a very average 5.5 out of 10. I think this is a very mediocre horror movie. It doesn't really do much to elevate itself past most January horror movies. Again, it's a lot better than like the worst of those, but compared to what it could be, I was personally really disappointed. If you're a diehard horror fan and really want something to watch, this might be able to itch your fancy. But if you're just looking for a thrilling movie, this probably isn't going to do much. You can I would recommend skipping this in theaters. But yeah, I think we jump right into the second review of the night, that being One of Them Days, directed by Lawrence Lamont. This is about two roommates, one named Drew. She is a waitress at a restaurant, and she is interviewing that day for a franchise, for a leadership position in the franchise to expand it. This would really put her and her roommate in a really great spot. Her roommate Alyssa, Drew is played by Keke Palmer. Her roommate Alyssa is played by SZA. She is an artist who her boyfriend is living with them. He's really just kind of like this sort of like deadbeat guy, doesn't have a job, and she's just supporting him. And that day when Drew thought she gave the money to Alyssa to go pay the rent, Alyssa had ended up giving it to her boyfriend, and her boyfriend ended up using it to start a t-shirt line. So while Drew has to worry both about her interview, now she has to worry about paying the rent on time, or else they are going to get evicted by their greedy landlord. This might set this is a really great this story does a really great job at setting up the stakes and making you really understand that, like, hey, we're on a time limit, we're on a time crunch throughout the film. It constantly keeps showing like 8 hours until rent is due, 7 hours until rent is due. And I think that is a really fun way to add conflict to your film. It's rare we get really great studio comedies in theaters, especially this early in the year. But this is absolutely one of them. I was so pleasantly surprised watching this movie. It was funny. It was heartfelt. It wasn't lazy. It wasn't going for like cheap jokes. Like I said, it adds a lot of really fun stakes watching these characters trying to figure out how they're going to get out of this tricky situation. And the place that the story goes is really, really fun. One thing I will say is, for a movie that has a pretty short runtime, it's a little over an hour and a half. It doesn't go right away into like just a joke per minute, or like the funniest scenes. It does a great job of setting up all of not just Drew and Alyssa, but also everyone in their complex who has storylines. They have one friend who just got evicted, who is trying to sell his stuff outside of the complex. One of Drew's neighbors is a barber who is supposed to cut her hair, but is not going to do it, or else unless she pays extra, because he's very greedy. They have a new neighbor played by Maude Apatow, who just moved in, who's like super peppy and super happy to get along with everyone, even though she moved into this kind of a poorer neighborhood and kind of a more beat down complex. And she's the one that has this like really optimistic attitude when everyone's just really done with life. Tons of really, really fun side characters. Drew is very much like secretly in love with this guy named Maniac. That's his nickname. Even though he has a very like scary demeanor, even though we don't really have any reason to really be fearful of him, and just where that romance goes with him is really, really fun and has a really satisfying conclusion. But yeah, this movie doesn't. This movie has a lot of really fun side characters, and it does a great job at setting up its world and having you care about all of these characters. Keke Palmer and SZA are both fantastic in this movie. Keke Palmer is great as the straight woman, is the one that she does a great job of making you care for the character and making you really hope that she can nail this interview and that she can get money to not go homeless, because you understand like how big of a deal this would be, and why these characters need to get this money so badly. SZA is great as the like comedic sidekick in this movie. She's the one that doesn't quite have her life together. She's the one that is trying to make excuses for this boyfriend of hers, even though she knows that he's like a total tool and a total a stick in the mud guy that she should kick to the curb. And their dynamic is really, really fun. Something this movie does that I really, really want to applaud it is towards the third act, towards like the end of the second act, beginning of the third act, where we think our characters are really screwed, are really down in the dumps. We think we are building towards a big misunderstanding and argument scene between Drew and Alyssa, and we don't really do that, because I really want to applaud that, because a lot of comedies would have that. They fight, they be enemies for like 10 minutes, and then towards the end of the movie they get back together because they realize they do need to team up. We all know this cliche. We're all annoyed by this. This movie says, no, we're not going to do that. We're just going to have them have like one argument, and they're like, okay, but we're not gonna like go our separate ways because we know we do have to we do have a mission and we do need to get our money in order to not lose our house. And I do want to applaud the movie for that. When the movie does get funny, like when it does start sprinkling its jokes, it's not afraid to get really, really funny and really, really obscene. There is one scene where Drew and Alyssa go to a blood drive in order to donate blood, and without spoiling anything, it gets very bloody, very not safe for work, and I really love just how the movie is not afraid to go those certain spots. There's a really funny scene in a loan center. There's a really funny scene at a fast food restaurant. Movie has a ton of really funny jokes, and I think that's why it makes this comedy so funny, because even though you do care about the characters, it doesn't forget that for a comedy to be good, it does need to be funny, and this movie is absolutely funny and has jokes for days, and I really do love that. And I do really love that the movie did not forget to be humorous and be funny. If I had one major complaint about the film, I think towards the end there is a new subplot that is added that ups the stakes even more for our characters, where not only do they need to worry about paying rent and getting their rent on time to not get evicted, they need to worry about this whole other situation that happens that they get involved with around halfway through the film. And I think it just makes the ending just feel a little bit too cluttered, where I think with a movie with this short of runtime, I think it makes everything towards the end not get wrapped up super well, because I think it just realized, oh crud, we have so many things we have to worry about, and the stakes even get like really, really high from where we started the movie. It gets even higher to the point where I'm just like, I think everything gets a little too cluttered, and I don't think you needed that like third act. That major third act twist and third act reveal to up the stakes, because I think at this point in the movie the writing had done a good enough job in making us care for the characters that we just wanted to see them succeed and end up getting their money, and we wanted to see Drew nail this interview to get this job. And not saying the last subplot is necessarily bad. I just don't think it was necessary, and I think it just makes the ending just feel a little bit more cluttered. That being said, with the ending, it is a really fun ending. Compared to how like frenetic and how chaotic the rest of the film is, it does have a very like chill ending and has a really great message on friendship, and I do really value that, and I did think that was fun. And yeah, just the last thing I wanted to say, I think throughout the duration of the film, it does a great job at creating new conflicts for our characters to get hindered by in the plot. Like just when we think our characters are safe, when we think they've caught a break, it does a great job at like throwing a wrench in there and making it believable. There is a character that is hunting down these characters throughout the film, and the way how she ends up finding Alyssa and Drew is really, really funny. And yeah, I think the director and writer did a great job at making us believably understand why these characters keep running into trouble with everything that happens to them. If I were to rate this movie on a scale of 0 to 10 videotapes, I was not expecting to give this high of a score this high in the year, but I'm going to go an 8.5 out of 10. It has a few things that bother me that keep me from like saying this is like an all-timer comedy, but with all the great performances, with all the great storylines, and with all the funny scenes, this is a comedy I would highly, highly recommend you go check out, especially in theaters. There aren't too many like great 2025 releases, 2025 movies that release early on in the year. This is one that you should definitely put on your radar, and I would highly recommend going to see this in a theater, especially with a big crowd, so you can really experience all the laughs together. But thank you for joining me for the first episode of Cinemaster's Reviews in 2025. Remember to like this video and subscribe to the video store. It helps grow our channel a lot. Next week, I'm going to be reviewing Flight Risk, the new Mel Gibson, Mark Wahlberg movie, as well as the new Steven Soderbergh movie, Presence. Really excited for both those movies. Excited to talk with you guys next week. It's always great to see you guys. Really looking forward to this year. Always love talking about movies. Hope you're all enjoying your day off. Happy MLK Day to everyone, and remember, as always, watch more movies.
And the award for most vapid film review of the century goes to...
Okay, movie review. Okay, I thought it was Beauty.
And he's now in cinema hell, where one day we'll all be reunited.
This is me at the Regal Cinema crying as I did through much of the film.